Hello, everybody, and you're very welcome to this episode of Successful Perspectives. Successful Perspectives, of course, is when we deep dive into the topic of leadership with a member of our network, Boardroom by EMIR. I'm delighted to be joined for this conversation with Steve Allen, who is the CEO of dnata. Of course, dnata needs no introductions. Steve, it is wonderful to have you on Successful Perspectives, and thank you for giving up your very precious time.
Thanks, Trevor. Thanks for inviting me.
No, it's our pleasure. Okay, so you're in the role now, probably around a year or so, if I remember correctly. And this conversation is around leadership. So I think that's an interesting point to start on. In this year or so, in this new role as the CEO of dnata, what do you feel you've learned about yourself? What do you feel you've learned about leadership?
Good question. I think in terms of what I've learned about myself, I've obviously been CEOs of other businesses around dnata before sort of taking on the top role. I think it was a natural step. I feel like I was ready for it. So it was quite a natural step into this role. I think, people always talk about as a CEO, it's lonely at the top. And you tend to mix more with other CEOs in different businesses than you do with people within your own business, and I found that very productive. And also, more reliant on your family and friends because then you can talk things through with them in confidence, and it's great to have a great family around you, and I'm very lucky to have that. I think in addition to that, there's always bumps in business. We've had a very bumpy year, but businesses are incredibly resilient. And as a CEO, you're making decisions for the long term, not the short term. So, those bumps become smaller as you get more involved in those long term conversations.
Looking back over some of the other experience that you've had in CEO roles, what do you feel in some of those positions or particular areas of experience are serving you well now in this role?
I mean, very much people leadership. I mean, I think once you get to a certain level, it's all about leading people, setting clear direction, making sure that you know where they're headed and how you support them. So it's just translating that to a sort of a broader perspective. Obviously you build the knowledge of your business, you build the knowledge of the economics, you build the knowledge of the operation. But really, once you go above a certain level, it's all about leading people.
And that leadership philosophy, how would you describe, what are the central tenets of your leadership philosophy? And is this something you reflect about a lot?
Absolutely. I think I've been a bit of a student of leadership ever since I was young because I've always wanted to be a GM or a CEO of a business. So I've read many books and studied people that I've worked with and for. So I guess you take the best of everything you see. For me, my leadership style is very much about setting clear direction, making sure that we have well-aligned goals, that we have measurable success, and then empowering and supporting people for becoming successful, working with them, ensuring you listen to them. And then it all comes down to, I think, as an individual, staying true to your values. I think honesty, fairness, sort of caring, but being really consistent about who I am and what I want from our business is really important. And that's what I often reflect on. When I go home at night, I'll go, well, am I being consistent in what I'm doing? And also, am I living true to my values?
Well, it's great to hear that you had, this ambition throughout your career to get to this stage. And you mentioned that you learned from some of the best, and you also sought out experience in other areas, trying to learn as much about leadership. Thinking back towards the start of your career, what did you think about leadership then? And is it everything that you thought it would be now? What are some of the areas that perhaps were misconceptions?
Well, I guess when I started my career, I did a lot of sport at school, and leadership to me was being captain of the team or creating the tours. So I thought leadership was all about sport when I first joined, and what sportsmen did. But I think what I learned the most is that everybody is different. Everybody's an individual. Everybody has a different background. They've developed the way they work and the way they live in different ways. So you really have to be very, very adaptable and really understand people and in a lot broader perspective than I'd originally thought. And that's meant that I've had to go out of my comfort zone to understand people as well. So yeah, it's a big people business.
And over the years, how did you do that? I'm always curious about this. How did you take yourself out of your comfort zone to learn more? Because as you rightly say, I think one of the big realizations is trying to understand how everybody views the world in a different way. And that can be frustrating at times. You're trying to understand how could someone possibly see the world that way.
Yeah.
What was your journey? What did your journey look like on that?
Well, I think the most valuable question I ever ask anybody is what motivates them. And it's something that I do whether I'm going through an interview process or whether it's just meeting somebody for the first time in my business. I try and get that question in of what really motivates them. And a lot of people, the most common answer is, I want to care for my family and I want to make sure that they're comfortable going forwards and my kids grow up well. And then once you get into that conversation, you start to realize that, it's actually not, did I hit my KPIs this year? It is much more of a personal question. And then, the opportunity to actually visit not only the places of business that people work, but actually spend time with people on the more social occasions. I've had great fun playing cricket with my, I said I was into sport, playing cricket with some of the guys who work in baggage handling in the airport. And you really get to know, and they're so fired up and so motivated in the game of cricket, and you really get to know, what's really turning them on, and it's those sorts of things, putting yourself in those real life situations.
Two questions there. Did you cover yourself in glory in that cricket game with the baggage guys? And the
Well,
second question would be, well, what motivates you, right? If that's a question you're asking other people, when you turn that question on yourself, what motivates you? So,
well, that's a brilliant question. On the first one, the answer is no. I used to be a wicket keeper when I was at school, so I stood up to the wicket, and this Pakistani fast bowler ran up on a concrete slab, threw the ball down, and it smacked me right in the chest. And I realised I better stand a little bit further back next time. So, so yeah, no, it was quite an eye opener. But they thought it was really funny. So there you go. I just killed the CEO. In terms of what motivates me, I'm somebody who just always wants to try and achieve better. So I constantly question myself about, am I doing better than I thought I could? And I think that's sort of ingrained into me just from when I was a kid. I was always trying to get on. As I said, I was in sport. I was always trying to improve myself and achieve relative success with that. So enjoyed the success of doing better. But at the end of the day, that's treated me quite well, because as I'm always trying to do better, then I've been given better roles to do. So it's a very sort of natural succession for me all the way through my career. Is I've always tried to do better, I've succeeded in doing better, and therefore I've just got to the next level.
where did that ambition come from? It sounds like you had that from a young age, right? It played out first in sports and then in your career.
Yeah, and I wish I could say, I had a hard upbringing and I had to fight for every piece of bread, but I didn't. I had a very privileged upbringing. I think I was just, naturally competitive all the way through my life, and I compete with myself as much as I do with others. I always want to be better than I am today.
So this is something that we talk about a lot in our office, right? I'm always striving for us to keep improving and keep improving. And then one of the challenges I found is that I kind of need to temper that to a certain extent, because then I don't want the rest of the team feeling that, they're always aiming for perfection, which can be quite a stressful thing to put on people. So I want them to understand we're aiming for high performance and mistakes are absolutely fine. Is there anything in your, given that seems to be something that runs through you, is that something you've had to deal with or manage, or how did you do so?
Yeah, sure. I mean, don't forget, better is not best. So so it can be very stressful, I think, to say to somebody, you've got to continuously improve, continuously improve, continuously improve. And so the ethos of continuous improvement is a good one, but it's a long-term goal. So overall, you want to continue to improve and go upwards, but along the way, you're going to have some bumps in the road, because if you're not taking enough risk and you're not failing occasionally, then you're not going to get better in the end. And that's where I say to people, every now and then you'll try and fail at something, but if you don't do that, you'll never get better. And I guess that's the philosophy of continuous improvement in my eyes is very much, it's a long-term improvement, not just a short-term gain.
Which is an important thing to build into the culture of any team. Talk to me about the culture and the importance of it for you, particularly in bringing new leaders to the fore.
Obviously, culture is something that you intrinsically bring to your organization. I think you have to lead from the front in terms of culture, and culture is reflective of you as a CEO, so you need to be very careful of that. I think one of my favorite phrases to people is that you have no idea the impact you have on people around you, and you should always be aware of that. That builds the company culture. And then in terms of developing future leaders, I think people always are influenced by the environment that they work within and the colleagues they work with. So if there's a very clearly articulated company culture, it becomes a lot more consistent for them, and they know exactly where they're working and what they're dealing with. And then you have to empower people. You have to give them opportunities to grow into that company culture and to really help to sort of not only embrace it, but even develop it even further. So I think with any leaders coming through, as long as they've got that sparkle in their eye that they want to add value and they really want to help your company grow, you have to give them the space to do that. Let them try and fail occasionally, but really sort of continue along that path of the clear culture that you've tried to develop.
It sounds, listening to you, Steve, I'm absorbing what you're saying, and it sounds to me a clear part of your leadership style is very much giving people a consistency and clarity around expectations in terms of vision, in terms of the important role they play in order for the whole team and company achieving that overall objective and vision.
Yeah.
Were there organizations or leaders, without mentioning names, obviously, over the course of your career where you learned what not to do? And you thought to yourself, the next role I take, I'm actually taking some inspiration there, but inspiration in the sense of how to do things differently.
Yeah, I think throughout your career you work with different leaders, and they're all different types. I think I've worked with leaders who are sort of inspirational, charismatic individuals. I've worked with leaders who are deep thinkers, quite quiet, but very cerebral in what they do. I've worked with tyrants, people who think that leading is by shouting, who shouts the loudest. And I've had, without naming names, obviously, I've worked for somebody like that, and I know how that feels. It really is a short-term game, leading like that, in my view. But and I think I was trying to think of somebody that sort of really struck home with me in terms of an example of poor leadership. And I once worked for a guy who made you feel like you owed him something. So he always said, remember that favor I did for you? And so you always felt like you owed him something. And with some people, that he thought that he was generating loyalty from people, but really I think what he was generating was resentment. And so that really taught me that that leadership is all about making people feel better in themselves and feel like they're really progressing with their lives. It's not about you, it's about them.
I know this is an impossible question to answer, but I'll ask it for the fun of it. I don't know if you've read the book From Good to Great, right? And taking these organizations exactly from good to great. And it's a long time ago now that I read it, but I remember one of the points in it being that when they examined the leadership style, or perhaps I should say the personality trait of great leaders, it ran contrary to what many of us had expected, right? That first caricature you painted of that kind of very charismatic leader, actually, according to the research, it's often that quieter CEO who doesn't run towards the limelight. Okay, they may have to do that as part of their role, of course, but it's not hardwired into them that that's what they want to do every single day. On your take, given I can safely assume the tyrant doesn't fall in. Well, over your experience, which one do you think is most effective, given the leaders you've worked with?
Yeah, I guess when I was younger, the one I wanted to be was the charismatic leader. Now I've got these grey hairs. I've realised that probably the cerebral leader is probably more effective. And I think there are times where you have to be charismatic. There's no doubt that you have to be willing to do interviews like this, and you have to be willing to do PR, and you have to be willing to talk to big staff town halls and things like that. So you can't be a complete introvert as a leader, because you've got to be visible, you've got to be available for people. But on the other hand, I think that the danger is that you just rush into things. And I think certainly my view on leadership is that there's nothing wrong with sleeping on it. There's nothing wrong with taking your time to make sure you're coming up with the right decision at the end of the day. And that takes a certain amount of willingness to just step back, take the emotion out of everything, look at the data, get further insights, and then make your decisions, rather than it being a woohoo moment.
I love it. Steve, you've been very kind with your time. Just one last question, if I may. What's the best piece of career advice that you've received over your career?
Well, actually just what I've just said. I worked for a guy called Rod Eddington, who I don't know if people know who Rod was, but he was the CEO of British Airways. He was Australian, very intelligent man, Rhodes Scholar, and he visited me in the Middle East when I was the CEO for British Airways in the Middle East, and I spent a lot of time with him. And the one thing that he said to me was, "Steve, don't be afraid to sleep on the decision," because he said so many times emotion comes into it. You want to be that big man. You want to be the guy who can, I've got the decision for you now. But so many times you can rush into it wrong. And I use that right from the end of when I write an email and I think it might have a bit too much emotion in it. I will come back to it in the morning, right through to if I'm standing if I'm in a board meeting and somebody says, "I want a decision now." And I'll say, "I'm just not prepared to do that right now. I'm going to have a think about this and I'll come back to you."
When you think about it, it really is fantastic advice. And how many times have we found ourselves not doing exactly what you said, sending an email and then thinking, "Oh God, that you read it later and think that was a silly email." So fantastic piece of advice. Steve, thanks so much for being on this episode of Successful Perspectives and sharing your leadership style. It was wonderful to have you, and thanks again.
Pleasure.